Buongiorno e benvenuti alla conferenza stampa del nostro film in concorso All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. Prima di cominciare introduco gli ospiti al tavolo a partire dalla mia destra, cioè dalla destra in fondo. Allora, il produttore John Lyons, il produttore Howard Gettler, il protagonista Harry Koren, la protagonista Nan Goldin, la regista del film Laura Poitras, la protagonista Megan Kapler, il produttore Yoni Goligov. So I'm going to start with a question to both Nan and Laura. I think the film originally started as a project of film intervention, pain intervention, and at some point it became something else. And so I'm going to ask you to what was the meeting point? Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to thank the festival for inviting the film here and for recognizing that documentary is cinema and to putting in competition with wonderful films. I also feel it's important to acknowledge that one of the filmmakers whose work is screening in competition is currently in prison in Iran, Jafar Panahi. So I think we should use this moment to draw attention to that in any way we can. So in terms of this film, this is a film that's in every way a collaboration. The film began actually with Nan and Payne. They started documenting when they decided that they were when they formed the organization Payne. They started filming their very first actions because they knew how important it was, and they were making a documentary, and they filmed for a year before they invited myself, Yoni, Howard, and John to join the project. So this is a film that was begun by the protagonists, and we were entrusted to tell the story. Every documentary I've ever made, it's an organic process. You go in thinking, what the story is or what you're interested in, and then it evolves over time. And I think in the first meeting with Nan, it was in her living room. I showed up 20 minutes late because there was a rainstorm. I was totally drenched. And then I had to borrow a shirt from her. And so she loaned me a shirt, and I was hearing about the project. And in that first meeting, she told me about this exhibition she had organized in 1989 called Witnesses Against Our Vanishing, which was dealing with the AIDS crisis. And that she had organized this extraordinary exhibition in response. And it was an artist who was using her influence to talk about, really the failures of society that were happening in that moment. And I knew that when she was telling me this, that there was a connection between this moment in the 80s and AIDS and what's happening today with the overdose crisis. And so that was like one of the first pillars. It's like, okay, I knew that this story was going to have to converge with this extraordinary exhibition she had done. And then, of course, I also, as a filmmaker, Nan's work is like groundbreaking in terms of storytelling and visual language and bravery and representation, and so that was always going to have to be also part of the film. And so these became the kind of pillars of the film, and then we filmed. We filmed the process of what Payne was doing, and then Nan and I began these extremely intimate interviews. Yeah, it was during the COVID, and I would go to her house usually on the weekends, and we were doing lots of testing, but we would go and we would have these conversations, and it became really obvious very soon how intimate they would be, how they would go into really deep and in some cases painful subjects, and it was just so it was extraordinary. And then we during that process, I realized, okay, that Nan's voice was going to be, like a key part of telling the film. And, and I have to say, like, as a filmmaker, who's done political work. I have such respect for what Nan has chosen to do, to use her power and influence in the art world to demand accountability and to expose this kind of really toxic philanthropy that we've seen with the Sackler family, but they're not the only ones. And then the final thing I'd say is that this is being streamed, and so we would like to acknowledge all the Sackler lawyers who are now tuning in and being overpaid to monitor this, and you know, and the continued protection of this family who's essentially bought their way out of any kind of accountability, despite a death toll that is, in the US alone, over half a million and rising.
Nan, when did you decide that what you were filming needed to become something different, or needed to become a story? And was it easy to include another artist in your process?
Well, I knew Laura predominantly as a political documentarian, and my worry when she came on was that I don't have any state secrets to share. And so I wasn't important enough for this. And then at some point, she didn't want to make an artist bio, but I was making work for a show in London. And she actually started editing my work a little bit. And she and I are the same. We can't watch an artist make work without giving our opinion. So that was really powerful. She had great feedback. I grew to trust her more and more. I'd say that our sessions together on weekend were like therapeutic without a therapist, and I revealed very many deep things because she had a way to ask me and bring me out of that. And so I talk about things that are very painful, and I guess I never thought about who was going to see them. So it's pretty astounding to me that it is here in Venice, which is a real honor. It was the festival I wanted to be in.
Thank you for saying that. How important was that these recordings that you did were audio? There was no video involved. What made that choice? What determined, and how did it impact the choice?
Yeah. Do you want to say?
Like I said, that's what allowed it to be so intimate. I mean, Laura first filmed us in London when I had an opening in the Marian Goodman Gallery in 2019, and nobody was even conscious of her filming. I mean, it's the fly-on-the-wall technique, where that kind of invisibility allows life to go on without any interception. And then, I guess, during COVID, it was much easier to talk than it would have been if I was on film.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's essential. I don't think we would have been able to have the intimacy that we were that we had, and I'd also say we really created this a safety around the process. Alex Kortler, the executive producer, sorry, he's in the audience. I should be up here. I don't know. But sometimes would participate, and we had some. It was really important. In Nan's photographs, she talks about in the film like that the people that she photographs also that it's a collaboration, and that she wants them to participate, or if there's something that is not. That they don't want to show, that she respects that. And it was imperative that this film show the same respect to Nan as she shows to the people she photographs.
Yeah, Laura gave me incredible respect. I don't think any other documentarian in the world would have given me allow me so much feedback into the film, and like whether or not I wanted the film to be released. And so I grew in the process to stand by the film more and more and want it to be released,
yeah.
Especially in Venice.
And for me, I think it's important to acknowledge the extraordinary bravery of Nan's work and her willingness to really talk about things that most people don't talk about. And in the film, she has a line where she says the wrong things are kept private in the society, and it destroys people. And I think this is one of the core issues in this film. It's also, I think, one of the core issues in Nan's body of work.
I think all my work has been about stigma, about fighting stigma since the beginning, starting with different forms of sexuality and gender choices in the early 70s, about relationships and the difficulty in maintaining relationships between men and women, and then on to the AIDS crisis, then through the years, mental illness, hospitalization, self-harm, and then, of course, people who use drugs and the opioid crisis. These are all stigmas that my work is about, and I just think the wrong things are kept secret, I guess. I think people need privacy, but the wrong secrets are kept. And these things are things that if you talk about, and more, like when I was battered and I showed my work around the world, women would come up to me and said, well, I photographed myself after I was battered, like you. And they were able to talk about things they'd never talked to anyone about. And that's my goal.
You mentioned before, Laura, touched briefly on the connection between what pain does now and what Nan is doing now and the 80s and the activism, it's very moving in the film, and it's beautifully rendered, organic. It's this continuity. I wanted to ask both you and Nan how that moment, historical moment, in America was important to the film, and how relevant is the connection?
Yeah, unfortunately, American society, it's staggering that we've had these sort of waves of epidemics, of crisis, and the complete failure of the government, or that we have a system where a family like the Sackler family and a company like Purdue Pharma can knowingly promote a drug that they knew to be addictive. And to do that with sort of the most egregious profiteering. And so, unfortunately, there are these historical parallels and resonances. And Nana said that she lost so many people in the 80s, and then to see this happening again, I don't know. Do you want to?
Actually, there's 10 million people in the world who still have AIDS. And a woman just got cured. And of course, that's a hope, but it's still raging. And stigma, AIDS phobia, killed so many people, and they killed my community. And I don't want to let another community die, but I think that David Wojnarowicz is saying in 1989, isn't it ludicrous that here I am dying of AIDS and there's no health care? And that's even worse now in America. Nothing has gone in the right direction. Nothing. People are not taken care of. And my proudest thing is that we brought down a billionaire family in a time when billionaires have a different justice system than the rest of us. And there's total impunity in America. And we brought one down so far.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that... Megan, do you want to address that also in terms of the work of pain?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to bring up the topic of the lack of healthcare and resources and stigma used against the overdose crisis, despite most Americans being affected directly by it, whether it's a family member or a friend. And the powers that capitalize off of that, because the pharmaceutical industry doesn't just exploit people, they also lobby against universal health care in America and measures like that that would really give people access to care. And, right now we're, in America, in some states, needle exchanges, clean needles are still illegal. That is like the basic harm reduction thing that would save so many people from contracting AIDS or hepatitis, yeah, I also just see the parallel in how much the two crises overlap, particularly with the pharmaceutical exploitation, but also the government inaction and incarceration in the racist drug war in America.
Harry?
Yeah, to echo what Megan said, I think that the need for basic healthcare, like overdose prevention centers in the US, is very evident right now. We have them in New York, luckily, and they're saving lots of lives since they opened this year, but we still need more. And I think when it comes to Nan's ability to bring this all to the fore and to have people talk about it and to put so much at stake and sharing this intimate part of herself, I think in terms of healthcare in the film, she speaks towards her recovery and medication-assisted treatment, which is something that so many people need and don't have access to in the US, whether it's because healthcare is expensive or because the medicines themselves are criminalized in a lot of cases. And Nan shows that this is what somebody can do to be in their own version of recovery. And I mean, just the work you've been able to do in the last few years alone in that recovery is incredible. So, I mean, I think that speaks to how productive and generative people in recovery can be, whatever that recovery looks like.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Hi, I'm here coming everyone in Israel. Laura, thank you for a great and brave film. And Nan, it's a huge honor to meet such a legend that I adore so many years. So you said that you are not speak about stigmas, but when you begin your Pioneer Week work and you take picture of underground people, there was only few definitions. Now there is definition to everything. I define myself as a gender queer. So how do you define yourself? And how come you didn't mention your Jewish roots in the film? And Laura, maybe it's your decision. And is your Jewish roots influence on your art, on the style?
I'm afraid to say not. I mean, I wouldn't be who I was if I wasn't brought up by a Jewish family, you know, and pushed so hard to succeed. And I'm proud to be Jewish, but it's not part of my daily life. As for what I call myself an old lady.
La signora aveva una domanda. Lei aveva una domanda.
Thank you, Nan. My friend Jan Perme asked about your movies yesterday. It was really late. She was awake asking me about your friend Cookies because you have in common this friend. And so thank you very much. I was really moved. I'm here to ask you from Arts Life a question about young artists. At some point you said how we can trust ourselves. I took pictures. Which kind of advice you can give to younger artists? And when you reach success, are you stay authentic to your nature?
I would say so. I mean, I live like I did a little better apartment, but basically like I did in, I don't know, my morality, my interests, my aesthetics, my importance of friendship over family, our blood family, all those things I've maintained. And I would say to young artists that don't worry about the market, which is all-consuming now. It's where people go directly and what they care most about. And you need to work whether or not you have support. And the most important thing you can learn to say is no for artists.
Yeah. I'd also like to say that I think that this film is a challenge to other artists or people who have positions of power, and how do or don't they use that power. And I mean, for me, this is why I was drawn to this film. I mean, here we have a legendary artist who chose to risk her position in the art world to expose its corruption and the toxic philanthropy and the whitewashing of blood money in museums and institutions. And the Sackler families are not the only one. This is, you know, this in terms of this toxic kind of philanthropy. And I don't know of another artist who's doing that. So this is what I think is very rare for somebody to use their position in the world and take such risks.
Yeah,
The things I do aren't a choice, actually. It's the things in front of me that I have to react to. And I was in a clinic to get sober, and when I got out, I realized there was a raging opioid crisis, overdose crisis actually. And I'd been basically in my own opioid crisis and cut off from the world. And so I saw what was going on and I felt, how can I affect it? And then I read some excellent journalism and found out about the Sacklers. And I only knew them as philanthropists since I was a child. And then it was revealed where their money came from. And my thought was, how can I shame them among their own social strata? So I started a group, Harry and Megan, Alex, Noemi, all of these people worked with me. And our first goal was to shame the Sacklers. And then after that succeeded, and we got the names off the museums even earlier. We changed our focus to harm reduction and how to keep drug users alive and destigmatizing drug use. We were never anti-opioid, which people think. We're anti-overdose and people making money off overdose, sickening amounts of money. So now we're advocating very strongly for medication-assisted treatment, as Harry mentioned, overdose prevention sites, and destigmatizing and keeping people alive at their own place that they are in their lives, not asking people to go into some kind of recovery. So.
Yeah, I think the way we like to put it is that we took the stigma and we put it on the Sacklers.
The film raises also a larger conversation on the responsibility that cultural institutions have towards society, and as they're becoming more and more corporate over the last few decades, I'm sorry to say. I'm wondering what the internal conversation with such institutions were, during the making of the film, or when they heard you were making the film.
Do they know? It hasn't been announced.
Yeah. We kept it a little bit under the radar, intentionally. From what we've heard, I mean, none of us are sitting on these boards of institutions, so we can't really speak for what's going on. But I think there's a lot of nervousness in these boards because of being exposed from where their money is coming from.
Yeah. There was this sense, first I have to say that our first few actions, museums didn't even release statements regarding them. The Met action, which was, covered in the New York Times, they did not get a comment from the Met. And the energy around the museums was that they likely couldn't address the Sackler issue because it would make them address the other sources of funding, which are very toxic. There was weapons distributors, pharmaceutical giants, everyone sitting on the boards of museums. And we kind of understood that. The only internal, well, not the only, but we have an internal dialogue confirmation from the Sackler WhatsApp chats that they were checking with their museums to make sure that everything was going well. And Dia, if I will say, one of the conversations said, we checked with Dia and they said, don't worry, Nan Golden is crazy.
Yes, and I'm proud of it.
There was a question there.
Jeffrey McNabb from the UK. Just a question for Nan and Laura. I mean, just the museums and art institutions, are there any that are still taking the Sackler money? And is the Sackler name still on some of these organisations? Because I think I read a report in the press, there's a couple of museums in the UK that still have the Sackler name. So is the fight still going on?
The V&A is #1 in terms of, we did a big action there and a die-in, which was beautiful, and it was covered by the media. And the director of the V&A has kept his allegiance to the Sacklers, and he's said so much. Meanwhile, there's, bridges that are taking off the Sackler name in London. We're very proud of the effect in England. We never thought that the British Museum or the National Gallery would actually take down the name or stop taking the money. I mean, a lot of them are stopping taking the money, then gradually the name is coming down off the Met, off the Louvre, off the Guggenheim, off a lot of universities have changed the names of their programs. But in England, yes, it's starting. And the Jewish Museum in Berlin took their name off the escalator. So, you know, it's working.
It's still on.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think either of us
So-
will travel to Israel, but people should do actions to take the name down.
So all you British people, get out there.
Yeah.
I have a question for Laura. The film is literally an epic, and the structure is just multi. You know, it's like a symphony. There's a musical quality to it, and I was wondering, how did you achieve this structure? Because it really is a cinematic, very daring and beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, I going back to cinema, I mean, as a filmmaker, as an artist, I make films, they are cinema. You know, yes, they deal with political issues, but I want to make cinema. Nan's life deserves an epic film, what she's done in her, like, what she's accomplished, and the risks she's taken. And so that, it felt like it had to have that kind of quality to it. And then also, you know, the way that we want that when we're the slideshows that we see throughout the film, that's also part of the storytelling, and they have the sort of epic quality to them. And then also I had extraordinary collaborators in editing. Amy Foote, who's here, is one of extraordinary editor. And the remarkable editor, Joe Beanie, who couldn't be here with us, but he really had this idea of how the structure could work, of moving between the present and the past. And we knew that we didn't want to make a biography film or a biopic film or a typical artist portrait, but it is a portrait, but with sort of historical forces that are being revealed through what is in the film. And we knew that there would be this convergence between the AIDS crisis and what happens with this exhibition, Witnesses Against Our Vanishing, converging with the present tense. And so this was, you know, we wanted to achieve that. And to have this epic quality. And I also want to acknowledge the music in the film and the composers who are here, Soundwalk Collective. Who, when we first talked to them, it's like, this needs to be, it needs to feel big and epic and operatic, and they did extraordinary work and worked with composers and orchestra in Berlin, and they have collaborated for many years with Nan and know her work, and so this was kind of also very much part of what we felt the film needed.
I think this is unfortunately, all we have time for. They came to tell me that we ran out. I want to thank everyone at this table for being in Venice and for the film, you know. And
Is there anything we haven't said that we want to say? We got everything? Okay, we're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I need a cigarette.
Buongiorno, grazie di essere venuti alla conferenza del nostro film in concorso Monica. E prima di cominciare vi presento gli ospiti al tavolo a partire dalla destra. La protagonista del film Trace, Lisette. Il regista del film Andrea Pallaoro. E la coprotagonista Patricia Clarkson. I'm going to start with a... Yeah, if you need them. Yeah. I'm going to start with a question to Andrea. Andrea, it's the third time you're in Venice. This is the second film of a trilogy, a very different character, a very different film. Can you just tell us a little bit about the origin of it?
Certo. Parlerò in italiano e se avete delle domande in inglese, if you have English questions, I will speak in English. Questo film si inserisce all'interno di un'esplorazione molto più ampia, di una trilogia, che è proprio iniziata con il mio film precedente, Anna, e si focalizza sul tema dell'abbandono, abbandono non inteso solo come l'atto di venire abbandonati, ma anche come le dinamiche psicologiche ed emotive di non essere accettati, di non essere riconosciuti. E mentre con il film precedente osserviamo una donna però che non riesce ad alzarsi, con Monica c'è una donna che perdona, un'eroina moderna, una donna che riesce a fare conti con i traumi e le ferite del suo passato.
How did you find Trace?
Well, since I want Trace to be part of this conversation, so I will speak in English. It was a very long process to find the person that could embody the emotional and psychological state of Monica. And it took over a year, and I saw about 30 candidates for the role. But since the very first moment we met, I knew that I found the person to go through this journey with. And I'm so happy that happened.
Trace, what was your thought when you read the script, and how did your coming to the film affect the evolution of that script, if in any way?
Well, when I read the script, I think it was December 2016, so it was a while ago. But it was beautiful and rare. It's very rare that you see a script where there's a trans character at the center, and the movie is told through her lens. It's her world, and that's so rare. Usually trans characters are more on the sidebar, a vehicle for someone else's story. That this was the opposite of that, and so that was the first thing that stuck out to me. The second thing is that she was a fully formed, layered, flawed, strong, beautiful, empathetic human being, and the relationship with her family and her protection of herself for so many years stuck out to me personally. And I think once you decided to have me, we did do a round of notes, and I got to give my ideas and input, and he was collaborative every step of the way. So it was really beautiful.
Can you tell us a little bit about those ideas, more specifically?
It's all a blur right now. I think it was just specificity in terms of like what she had been through and how to communicate that to the audience. So.
The film has incredibly intimate moments with the characters, and I wanna ask the three of you: how did you achieve those moments. Yeah. And they're quiet moments, but they're devastating from an emotional point of view. So it's a challenge, and it's a very high wire act.
Shall we?
Oh, no, hello. No, I think Trace and I, we've been attached to this for quite some time, and I've known Andrea for years and years and years. It seems like I'm the luckiest gal. I gave him an award at Marrakesh when I was on the jury there with Scorsese. We gave him an award. So I got to know Andrea, and our emotional life off camera, I think, helped inform the emotional life I had on camera, because it was a seamless transition. I am very emotionally connected to this man. I became very emotionally connected to Trace. And I think it was, that is the heart and soul of the film. It is an emotional piece that we had to be willing. I'm still quite sad about this film and the markings it left with me forever and ever and ever. Thank you. Anyway, I'm destroyed for the rest of my life. But I think it's Andrea. Andrea created this gorgeous, conducive environment for us to fly, for us to really be free to go to these, at times, just impossible and frightening and death-defying places, but we did it.
Yes, and I would add that this long process that it took us to raise the funds in order to make the film really gave us the opportunity to build a sense of trust, which is absolutely crucial for the type of exploration that we embarked on. And I couldn't be more proud of collaborating with such talented and committed artists like Trace and Patricia and the rest of their cast.
Trace?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, the question was how did you achieve the intimacy, that you actually communicate to the public that it's in the film, which is, and how did you get to this point of freedom?
For me, it was just feeling safe, and Andrea made me feel safe on set. I think it was the first day on set. He said to me, no one knows Monica better than you do. And that, to me, was a permission to explore and feel free in my work. The text was already there, so anything that I brought was just icing on the cake. And, because he's so empathetic and kind, and he's an actor's director, which I think helps the work.
I used the word freedom before, and I remember, Andrea, we had a conversation when right after I saw the film, and I had the pleasure to kind of knowing what you were working on, through your movies. And this one, I told you, this is the freest film that you have done. And as a filmmaker, it feels like, you're always very, you're a stylist, so you prepare your film very well. You know exactly what you want to achieve. This one has a different breadth. It breathes more. It feels like you allow the impalpable to happen more. Is that true?
Yes, and that is also because of the performances and the role that they play in the film, which is central. In fact, every decision, every creative, narrative, aesthetic decision was always in service of the performances. And I think that is what created exactly what you're talking about.
Una domanda là.
Sì, buongiorno, Sara D'Ascenzo del Corriere del Veneto. Volevo chiedere al regista se ci può spiegare la scelta dei 4/3 e all'attrice Trace se ha attinto... Buongiorno. Possiamo immaginare che possa aver attinto da sue sofferenze o da suoi ricordi. Volevo capire se, diciamo, come ha lavorato nella costruzione di questo personaggio, diciamo, proprio per tirare fuori le emozioni, e soprattutto nelle telefonate che sembrano attingere a tanto cinema anche italiano classico, ma forse vengono da dentro. Grazie.
E la scelta del formato dell'aspect ratio, che non è proprio 4/3, ma è 1.2:1, è una scelta che abbiamo fatto fin dall'inizio con la direttrice della fotografia, Kathleen Arismendi. Volevamo trovare un modo per esaltare il soggetto rispetto al paesaggio e soprattutto fare in modo che 2 o più corpi all'interno della stessa inquadratura portassero o realizzassero un effetto di codipendenza e di soffocamento, di claustrofobia, cosa che era per noi fondamentale per il tipo di esplorazione che abbiamo affrontato nel film. E questo ci ha anche aiutato ad usare il fuoricampo per evidenziare ancora di più il rapporto tra interno ed esterno, tra psicologico e fisico.
In regards to the phone calls and drawing from my own experiences, I think I'm always, as an actor, the challenge is to find the truth in the journey for the character, and there's always similarities, but you know, our lives are never identical to the character, so I think it was grasping at things that felt most like whatever situation I was in any given scene. So, but a lot of those phone calls were improvised, right? Yeah,
that's correct.
Most of them were improvised, and every take was different, and it allowed me to play and explore and channel my own experiences, but at the same time just have, be free from the text because I was allowed to improvise. So.
And in fact, I may add, it was one of those phone calls that was the very, very first scene that we shot, the very first day of production. And it blew us away. The whole set, every crew member was absolutely shocked and moved by what you gave us.
Thank you.
Una domanda?
Buongiorno, sono Elisabetta Esposito della Gazzetta dello Sport. Avrei una domanda per il regista. Abbiamo parlato delle esperienze personali che Trace ha potuto utilizzare per dare il meglio, ed effettivamente ci riesce in questo ruolo. Ho letto che anche dal suo punto di vista c'è l'esperienza della malattia di sua madre, che ha in qualche modo enfatizzato questa ricerca di un percorso, una ricerca sul passato e sull'abbandono. Volevo sapere se poteva condividere.
Certo. Ci tengo però a precisare che questa esplorazione non è precisamente autobiografica, ma che il personaggio di Monica, come quello di Eugenia, come i personaggi degli altri miei film, sono tutti un insieme di tante parti di me, ma anche di parti di persone a me care, a me vicine, e che mi aiutano ad esplorare delle esperienze, anche se indirettamente, ma delle esperienze che ho vissuto personalmente. E quindi sì, non voglio dilungarmi troppo su la parte personale di tutto questo, però è chiaro che ci sono io in questi personaggi.
Ciao, Marianna Ciarlante di Today.it. Volevo chiedere come hai fatto a scegliere il finale, perché è molto bello, è inaspettato, e come hai fatto a capire che era quello il momento in cui la storia di Monica doveva terminare? Ecco.
Bella domanda. A dire la verità, in diverse versioni della sceneggiatura abbiamo avuto finali diversi, però quella scena era sempre parte del film. Poi ci siamo accorti che effettivamente era il finale che si trovava più in sintonia con quello che era il film che stavamo sviluppando, cioè questo rapporto con il futuro, la speranza che il futuro sia diverso, che non crei gli stessi traumi, le stesse ferite che ha vissuto Monica.
One of the beautiful and actually quite original thing of the films is like it's very contained spatially. You know, the world, it exists in this particular world. There is only, I think, one time that Monica goes out. And was it always conceived this way, or because it's like it's after the contrast, you know, it's after the breakup, and then it's the pain afterwards. But it's very tempting from a dramatic point of view to insert, you know, more, you know, dramatics.
Yes.
So to be redundant, yeah.
Thank you for this question, Giulia, because it's a very, very important part of my cinematography, by my language, my cinematic language, because the fine line between what we choose to share with the audience and what instead we keep is at the center of the type of relationship I want to have with the spectator, you know, which is a relationship that is based in the question, not in the answer. Is based in the opportunity for the spectator to have a very independent and individual experience with the characters and with the story. And because I actually believe that, you know, that is the catharsis, that's the opportunity for catharsis. And that is the most valuable thing that cinema is for me.
And how easy it is for actors to work with a director that values restraint over, you know, bigger performance, especially in a piece that is so emotionally wrenching.
It's a joy. It's a dream. He is an actor's director. He, I came to this and was not disappointed, but he does. He Andrea, like many. Well, not that many, but like, you know, I've worked with Scorsese, and they're very specific and they are unique, individualized. They have a very specific vision of the world and the world of this movie. And that's what he brings, and you have to fit in that world, but the world also is malleable. So it allows us to bring what we can within his space, but it is his space. And, but it's a beautiful way to work because he's specific and the set is not, you're not reaching or debating. You knew what you wanted. And he, at times, was unrelenting in exactly what he wanted. I'm here. I came to Venice, okay? No. You know, Josh, you know, but it made us better actors. Andrea makes you a better actor, and I don't say that often, and I mean that with all my heart. He made me a better actor, and that is the sign of someone that that our industry should and must and always value.
Trace?
Yeah, I'll agree. It was very specific and delicate work. I think working with Patricia, also, I didn't feel like I ever had to get bigger. I could do what felt natural and organic and not have to overdo it for the sake of, I don't know, performance or whatever. It always felt authentic, and like we didn't have to make it bigger. and I appreciated that.
You have this scene. I don't want to give it away for the audience, but you have this scene between you two where things shift. So, how long did it take to get that moment?
Yes. No, it didn't. I mean, I thought about that scene was in me for so long, from the moment I had read the script and then I met Trace and really loved her and felt maternal to her immediately. And I knew what it was, and I was prepared. It was a rough night and then rough morning, but I was ready.
Yeah, there were no easy scenes in this movie, even though it wasn't dialogue heavy. Every scene, Monica was feeling a lot in every scene, and it was a challenge to kind of say it without saying it. But I think that's how real life is a lot of the time. And yeah, the chemistry with Patricia was instant. We knew it before we even got on set. We met at a party one time, and I felt it as soon as I hugged her that it was going to be special. So.
I think you have a question there, and then it's probably...
Salve, Giulia Bianconi del Tempo. Volevo chiedere al regista, visto che è un regista italiano che però lavora in America, qual è il suo punto di vista riguardo il cinema italiano? Lei come lo vede, visto che quando è partito questo festival siete 5 film, diciamo, italiani in concorso, anche Alberto Barbera ha parlato di un cinema che viene fatto qui in Italia delle volte che punta più sui numeri che sulla qualità. Allora, da occhio esterno, essendo però italiano, cosa ne pensa? Grazie.
Non ho avuto ancora modo di vedere gli altri film italiani, purtroppo, ma è una cosa che voglio fare il prima possibile. Detto questo, ci sono degli autori che stimo tantissimo in Italia, gli autori che mi ispirano, sia nel passato di quello che è del contributo che l'Italia ha dato al cinema, ma anche tuttora, oggi. Ecco, forse il mio augurio è che ci sia un po' di più di attenzione nei confronti proprio del linguaggio cinematografico in generale, cose che noto che non è il caso di tutti i film italiani.
C'è una domanda lì?
Al regista, buongiorno, Alda Vanzan, Gazzettino. Il suo film avrà 2 verdetti, uno della giuria e uno del pubblico. Cosa si aspetta?
Grazie della domanda, ma non mi aspetto nulla. Cioè, la cosa più importante è poter condividere questo film con gli artisti, con i miei collaboratori che rispetto e ammiro, e di esserne orgogliosi. E di sentire che ci siamo espressi con sincerità. Questo è un film che è un prodotto di una nostra collaborazione, è una collaborazione in cui ci siamo raccontati, ci siamo messi in discussione e l'abbiamo fatto proprio con onestà. E questo vorrei dirlo di tutti i nostri collaboratori. C'è Josh Close qua tra noi, che è stato un contributo straordinario al film, e a tutti i nostri caporeparti, i nostri produttori. Questo è stato proprio un lavoro di squadra, una collaborazione vera e propria, che poi è quello che il cinema è quello che il cinema migliore è per me.
I'll give the last question to myself. From a production standpoint, how hard is in 2022 to get a film like this financed and?
Our producers just winced.
It should be a question that's for our producers.
Yeah.
But it took us a very long time to put together this film. That's all I can say.
And on this note, thank you so much for being with us in Venice.
Thank you all.
For
Thank you.
bringing the
Thanks
film.
so much.
Li vuoi vedere tutti, Siamo chiusi qua dentro, sentiamo parlare di cose che forse non vedremo mai. Perché io già così mi sono già fatto un'idea di finché voglio vedere. È che noi dovevamo averli visti già prima della conferenza. No, me li immagino. Almeno possiamo fare...
Grazie di essere venuti alla conferenza stampa del nostro film fuori concorso Pearl. Prima di, anche se non hanno bisogno di presentazioni, prima di cominciare vi presento gli ospiti al tavolo. A destra, estrema destra, Mia Goth, la protagonista del film. E alla mia destra il regista Ty West. I will start with a question, and then anytime you want to ask, just raise the hand. I'm going to start with Ty. Ty, this is, well, I think it's the most ambitious film, to use a word that it doesn't mean much, but formally, structurally, it's the richer that you have done so far. And tell me, how did you made it?
Well, it was sort of interesting the way the film came together at all, which is somewhat a major credit to A24, because we were making another film called X, and we were in New Zealand, and at the time, it was peak COVID, and New Zealand had a zero COVID policy, so once you were in the country, everything was going like time had always, like COVID had never happened. So we were there to make a movie, and we had a crew, and we had everybody there, and we were the only people that could make movies more or less on Earth at that moment. And so it seemed like, well, what if we made 2 movies? And so that's where the idea of a prequel came from, because we had all of this stuff. And I was making a movie that was very craft forward, filmmaking craft forward with X. And so when the idea came up and we started talking about doing a prequel, it also needed to be very craft forward, but different than the previous. And because it was a prequel, and because we were going back in time, and because it was a movie about dreams and the way cinema affects people, it just sort of came together in a way of this sort of celebration of like traditional, ambitious, like old Hollywood filmmaking, but with a more modern, demented twist, I suppose. So that's kind of where it just came together in a very strange way, because we were in quarantine for 2 weeks to get into New Zealand and kicking around this idea, and then we started chatting about what if we really did it, and now here we are.
But the film references are also wildly different from X. This is a whole another part of American film history.
Yes, I mean, X in many ways was a celebration of this sort of like independent, auteurish 70s Americana filmmaking. And because Pearl was, I knew would be nothing like that, it really is leaning into the traditional style of studio filmmaking in the golden age of Hollywood, and I guess in that sort of Douglas Sirk kind of melodrama way. And we just wanted to make something that was when you think about a Technicolor style movie, you don't think about a story like this in it, and that seemed like an interesting way to present it, because you could present a story about someone with these troubles and murderous things in a very gritty, dark way, but I feel like we've seen that before. But to take something almost like Mary Poppins and then put a demented story in it, it just felt fresh to me, and it felt like exciting as a filmmaker to try to visualize it that way.
I think you had a question there.
Damiano Panattoni per Movie Player. Tai, Mia, credo che il film sia anche una riflessione su quanto il cinema sia influente, un mezzo potentissimo appunto che influisce le nostre vite sia nel bene che nel male in questo caso. E quindi una riflessione su questo, e poi brevemente come avete lavorato con A24, perché ormai è chiaro, non sbagliare un film, e se è già pronto insomma un altro film su Howard magari in questo caso. Grazie.
Well, yes, this is the answer to it being about cinema affecting people's lives. And in the previous film, X, it was about the way these people were making this movie and trying to create a life for themselves. And this is a different way in which someone who is isolated on a farm and is dreaming of a bigger life is seeing that reflected in the movies, and that's giving them the ambition. Both movies have a lot to do with ambition. And that's where it came from. And as far as A24, I mean, the reason I give them so much credit beyond just the obvious of making the movie, I mean, they bet on this movie before we even made the first movie. So they said, okay, we're going to make 2 movies before we'd even made 1. And that was, I mean, as a filmmaker, there's nothing better than that. I mean, that was to be believed in like that. And I had never even worked with them before, so it was a real testament to them. But yeah, I think that, and we talked about this, like, the way movies affect people is interesting. And as like artists and as filmmakers and actors, you know, everyone's ambition and dreams in a way are affected by kind of what they see up on the screen and what they relate to and what they don't. And I felt like that was relevant to not only X, but also to Pearl specifically. And if we were to make another movie, it would be that in a different way as well. I don't know if it will be about Howard, but you never know. It might be.
Mia, you want to add something? I think the question was also directed to you on you know, the film being also about the importance of cinema and cinematic images in everybody's life, if you agree.
Yes, well, you know, thank you. That's really what's keeping Pearl motivated. It's really, it's giving her a semblance of hope, and really if she didn't have that, she really wouldn't, I mean, I don't really understand the question, sorry. Sorry, no, I don't know what I'm answering.
I think what the question was is it's like the film addresses how important cinema is in everybody's life, and the role that it plays into their dreams and their ambition. And then if you agree, I think that was it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I saw many parallels with my own life and my own affinity that I have towards cinema and you know, the experiences I have had growing up as a little girl even, and you know, having ambitions of my own to replicate that in some way, and I found a lot of similarities between Pearl and I in that instance. So yes, definitely.
How did it's for me? How did the fact that you know how Pearl's dreams ended by having done, you know, the X, affect your performance and you know, your thinking of her and then acting her?
Yeah, well, you know, I've never had an opportunity like this where I've spent so much time with a character and explore the character at different ages and in different stages of her life. And so there was just a lot there. And the fact that, you know, I had already portrayed her as an elderly woman in X, it really was just in many ways the greatest prep that I've ever had for getting into my next film, and I probably won't ever have anything quite like that again. And you know, really, this entire experience with Ty and everyone at A24 has just been the most creatively fulfilling experiences of my life, and I'm very proud of what we've made.
One small thing to that is when we made. When we were writing the Pearl script, we didn't know if we were going to make it. We were hoping we were going to make it, and the joke he would say is like, well, worst case scenario, this will be like a tremendous backstory for your character in X, and you'll be very prepared. And so I'm glad we got to film it, but had we not, then, you know, we would have had a really in-depth preparation for the X character.
You say we. How much do you use to collaborate when you're writing, and how much you bring her in for this character in particular? Yeah.
We did quite a bit. I mean, I was in quarantine, and I said, I think this idea is going to go if we can pull this off. And so we would FaceTime, because Mia had not come to New Zealand yet. And so we would FaceTime every day, and we would kick around ideas, and I would write something up, and we'd send them back and forth, and we would do things like that. But for me, it was like super important, because we were making X, and there couldn't really be a movie called Pearl without Mia being a part of it, because it was a strange scenario where we were already making it. You already were Pearl. And normally you would probably do the movies in sequential order as far as time, and since we were going backwards, there was no movie without what you were going to do in X being reverse engineered into it. So it felt to me like it just had to be that kind of collaboration. So we would FaceTime while I was stuck in a hotel room and just kick around weird, creepy ideas and weird, ambitious ideas and hope that we'd be able to do them.
Is that on? There we go. Hi, Ty. I wanted to ask you, obviously you get a lot of director-producers in the industry, but you also edited this film. What's the importance to you of being able to direct and cut your own movies?
It's kind of just the only way I know how to do it. I've always done it. I came up doing everything myself, so it's hard for me. It's a little bit hard for me to give that away. And then it's also hard for me as someone who knows how to do it to not work with someone else and just be telling them what to do, which is, no one wants that. So You know, I always have the idea to be great, and on X I worked with a co-editor because we were making these movies at the same time, and that's just too much for a human being, and Cash, who did that, was great, and it's very helpful to have someone to collaborate with and bounce it off of, but with this movie I had a pretty clear idea of how it was going to come together, and we made it relatively economic in the way that we filmed it, because we made these movies back to back and inexpensively, and so it was really just a matter of just me putting it together. I knew how I was going to do it, and so but for me, I mean, editing is, what is the filmmaking term, that it's the final rewrite, and I think that's true. I think that as a filmmaker who writes and directs, and in my case edits, I have an idea for a movie, and then I write it down so that other people can understand what the idea is, and then we go film it, and then I put it together the way I originally meant the idea to be, and then hope that it works. And so it's all kind of, writing, directing, editing are really just kind of filmmaking. And there's certainly people that are better at editing than me, but when it comes to doing my own stuff, it's a bit of a personal experience, I suppose.
But I imagine that the fact that you edit the film, it makes you shoot exactly what you already know, and yeah.
It does. I tend to shoot what I want to be in the movie, and then I shoot a little bit of extra stuff in case I'm wrong, because everyone's wrong sometimes, and you've learned that the hard way. And so I always try to give myself like a plan B in case on a scene. But even with Pearl, I mean, there's a lot of big one-take shots in it where we were trying to do a lot of stuff in camera, and X was the same. And you just work on it on the day until you get it right, and then editing it is actually pretty easy because you're just picking the take you like best. And particularly with both the monologue and with Mitzi and the acts, I mean, we did several takes of each, and it was just sort of like, this is the one of that, and this is the one of that, and then suddenly you're like, whoa, we're a quarter done the movie in just 2 shots, and so, yeah, you do pre-visualize. I pre-visualize it anyway.
I think there's a question there. No, la signora là, dietro.
Hi. I wonder, you were talking about your influences of cinema. So regarding to horror films, so the soundtrack is very important. So do you have any references, influences by, let's say, other horror film directors, how they used sound? And the other question would be, soundtrack, for the soundtrack was responsible Tyler Bates from Marilyn Manson. So if you could please comment on how horror films and the sound was legendary for you as a director, horror film director, and the collaboration with Tyler Bates.
Sure. Well, I mean, sound design in movies, and particularly horror movies, is very important. A lot of times what you hear or what you think you see is much scarier than what you see, and a lot of times seeing things is ends up not being scary at all, what you imagine it to be. Sound is very good at triggering your imagination. I came up making very, very small movies, and we would always joke and say you have 1 picture, but you have 99 tracks of sound. So, and they were free, so you could make up for it with that. I mean, I think there's a lot of great movies with great sound design as far as horror movies. I mean, The Shining is an interesting one. There's a movie called The Changeling with George C. Scott that has a tremendous sound design. David Lynch does really great stuff with sound design. But this movie was meant to be really lush, and so we just went very big with all of it. And then as far as Tyler Bates, I had worked with him years ago on a film called The Sacrament that I had here, and then we did X together, and we did these 2 in a row, and so it was really exciting to see. Tyler's amazing, and to see him switch gears from X, which was this like vocal-driven score that he did with Chelsea Wolfe, to just completely go the other direction and do a 65-piece orchestral live, old school score was really amazing, and we did it in I called him and we had like 2 months, and he turned it all around. I mean, he did an amazing job. So I and the film owes a lot of credit to Tyler's brilliance in a way.
I have a question for Mia. I noticed that you also got the screenwriter's credit on this film. So I'd just like to know what your input was in the development of the character, and did you write parts of the story as well? Thank you.
Yeah, this was my first, well, I mean, to an extent, whenever you receive a script, I find you have to make it yours in a way. You have to do a little bit of rewrite here and there with a script, but this was the first time that I've actually had the opportunity to create this world and this character Pearl from its very conception. And I'd never written in such a formal format like this before, and so Ty in many ways guided me along, and he would email me or we would FaceTime, and he would tell me, okay, so we're at this part of the story and we're in need of such and such information. And, I tried to write it in the typical format, but that was quite difficult, and I struggled somewhat with the structure of it. And so eventually he just told me to, just put a timer on for 20 minutes, 45 minutes, and just go. And then we kind of really got into a groove with it. And I found that to be really enjoyable. And then I would send that over to him, and then he would then incorporate that into the script. And we did that right until, I was in quarantine in New Zealand, and we put the whole packet together and packaged together and pitched it to A24. And it was just such an experience and so exciting to be involved in a project and see how it, comes to be. Yeah.
Maxine from X and young Pearl are very similar but also very different characters. I'm very curious about, Mia, your approach to building both of those characters yourself as an actor and how that may have differed between the two.
Yeah, well, when I first sat down with Ty, I wasn't aware of the fact that he wanted his actress to play both Maxine and Pearl. And when he revealed that to me, the entire prospect of it all just became very exciting to me, and just really elevated the entire challenge at hand. And I started to work on it, and I realized very quickly that, the spirit of these, they have the same spirit, they have the same essence, but they're just different women. But at the core of them, they're identical. And so the prep that I did for Maxine informed how I was building Pearl, and vice versa. And so it was just a constant, I was just in a constant state of discovery with these two, and it was just, there was just so much there. It was just so rich, and there was just a lot to do as an actor. You don't often get opportunities to do things like this, and yeah, there was just a lot to sink your teeth into, really, and it was wonderful.
I'd like to go back to the theme of horror. Ty, you've been expanding the boundaries of horror film, and this is almost like when you break free with this one, because you take it in such different ways. I think I refer to the film when I saw it as, at X-rated Cinema Paradiso, because you have this welcoming, warm, sentimental tone, and then with the horror element. So tell me a little bit about combining these two poles.
Part of it was I just felt like I hadn't seen that before, and that felt like new and fresh. Because if I was going to do something particularly old-fashioned, there's a chance that it would just be too old-fashioned for anyone to want to be interested in. But I think it's almost so old-fashioned that it's almost new again, which I think seemed compelling. And when I started telling people when we were making it, like, I'm thinking about doing it really colorful. Because there was a brief moment where I was like, maybe it's this austere black and white, almost like Bergman-esque movie. And then I was like, chopping wood and all these things. And that's a very heavy tone. And if you read the script, you could imagine that and be like, oh, that would work. And then I just remember saying to A24, like, or we go like way in with the colors. And even when I said it, I was like, this is more exciting, and this feels newer, and this feels like something we hadn't seen before. And so that drove me to it. And a big part of, I hadn't made a movie prior to X, and I don't know how long it had been, almost 10 years. And sometimes you wonder, why would you go back and do something so traumatic? And the answer was that I really love movies, and I felt like I wasn't seeing a lot of craft, like filmmaking craft on display in movies as much anymore. It's just my opinion. Doesn't mean it's true, but that's what I felt. And so I wanted to make a movie that was really about celebrating the craft of cinema and the craft of filmmaking, which is why in X they're making a movie. And when we went to do Pearl, I wanted to continue that. So it really needed, for me, to be excited about it every day was so that it be a real celebration of cinema. It's just a different kind of cinema. And that to me is great because not only did, Mia get to show this amazing range of performance, which is a part of the craft, I got to do something director-wise that's sort of out of the ordinary as craft. Tom Hammock, our amazing production designer, took the same exact location and completely renovated it into like almost a Disney-like place, which was, if you were there in person, was very surreal because we had spent a month shooting this grimy movie there. We went away for 3 weeks and came back, and it was like a lucid dream because everything was brand new again. And he did an amazing job. Malgosia, who did the costumes, did an amazing job. She built all that from scratch, like in New Zealand. And that's exciting to me, is to see all of the people that work on movies and on X with the special effects makeup. We got everyone who's really great at doing movie stuff to do movie stuff. And I felt like that to me became so much more interesting than realism in a way. And I think that's just what got me excited about doing it in such a, I don't know, flashy is the right term, but rich kind of way.
I have a follow-up question, and then coming to you. For Mia, you keep Pearl believable in this world, which is so flashy or big that it could be ridiculous almost in a way because it's so extreme. And you keep her believable. You make us root for her even when she does bad things. But also there is the innocent is plausible. How did you work her character to keep this believability?
Well, I really feel that is the job of the actor, is to just be as truthful as you possibly can be in whatever world that you might find yourself in. That's really always at the forefront of my mind whenever I'm working on any role, is just trying to connect with the character in some meaningful way that the character and the words on the pages actually, end up meaning something to me. That's really, and the process to getting there, it involves a lot of things, I guess, and from writing with Ty on a day-to-day basis to it's so varied and it involves a lot. That's always a very tricky question because it's just something that you end up, it just becomes your whole life, it's just, you get the job and then it's a celebration for, 72 hours and then it's like, well, we got to get to work now. And then you just start living and breathing and thinking and you start reading things and you go and see things and you're just constantly trying to find inspiration and take things that, might influence what you do on the day. And then, when you get there, you just let it all go and hopefully something happens.
It's her innocence, I think, that it's the force, because you believe in her innocence. You keep staying with her even when she starts being disillusioned herself, So it's a beautiful performance.
I think we tried to really keep any sort of, both with X and Pearl, any sort of cynicism or nihilism out of the movie and try to make it, this is a relatively, Pearl's not a great person. However, the goal was always, there's a moment in the movie when you go to that dance audition that the goal is that everyone is like, I want it to work out. Forgetting all of the stuff that's happened up until that point, you're like, I know, but I want her to win because there's something truthful about who she is and what she's doing. And that always felt, I think, exciting to both of us. And I think to your question is like, it just had to be believable so that when you got there, you're like, yeah, I know, but I want it to work. Even though if you've seen the other movie, you have an idea of, well, specifically where it goes, you're still like, but maybe I don't. And I think that's a fun, it's been fun to see people have that reaction to the movie. And I think that's a testament to your performance and everyone just being, completely engrossed in it and charmed by Pearl.
Ty, you mentioned David Lynch earlier. When I was watching the film, I saw shades of Laura Palmer in this character, and I'd just like to know, was Fire Walk With Me in any way an influence on how you wanted to give more insight into this character?
It wasn't, but I do quite like that movie. I'm trying to think of how it could have even subconsciously. I'm not sure. I mean, great filmmaker. I've seen all his films, loved them all. So perhaps it's subconsciously in there. But it wasn't, when we were even prepping for the movie, I don't remember what we talked about movie-wise to watch, but I don't think that was on it. But it's a great movie nonetheless.
What movies did you watch? I think Cirque, maybe? Cirque was
I don't even know if we did. We may have talked about that. I think it was even more basic than that.
Whatever Happened to Baby Jane?
Yes, and then Wizard of Oz or something like that. It wasn't so much about seeing the movies we had just finished making a movie that was so not like this movie, so it was like a palate cleanser experience to be like, go watch Wizard of Oz, just to be like, whoa, okay, like we're going here now, because we were really entrenched in the 1970s. We were all isolated in a very small area of New Zealand that we turned into 1970s America, and we were all together all the time. And so to kind of like step out of that, we didn't have much time to get back to normal, so it was really about what are the most bombastic, childlike movies like that. And I can't remember, do you remember what other ones there were? We didn't have much time to watch movies, to be honest. We were in a hurry.
I know that Dancer in the Dark was inspiration for me, and that's one of my favorite movies, and definitely a point of reference when I was writing with Ty, and something that intrigued me in building a character that has somewhat of a similar journey as the character in that movie. But not many, a handful, but really...
I think maybe for the crew, for like Elliot, the DP, and Tom, maybe we talked about Red Shoes and things like that, just certain like real key Technicolor movies, just to kind of look at color palette things, and from picking wardrobe and things like that, just trying to find the right colors that, because you never wanted the movie to suddenly feel like an imitation, and it was very easy to go like, well, it's too purple, you know, or it's too red or whatever, and or it's not red enough, and things like that. And so that was helpful from just a palette, aesthetic palette standpoint.
And can you talk a little bit about the other stylistic choices that you've been directing choices for the film? That were important to you.
I'm trying to think if there was anything, you know, I really was just trying to set out to make what seemed like a children's movie about a young person who, you know, it's a relatively archetypical story of someone who wants a different life. And I was just thinking, like, let's tell that story, but have her different life be not the life that you expect it to be. So I don't know if there was anything other than just, for me, from a directing standpoint, it was very much about trying to get things like the axe chopping in a frame, seeing her appear behind it in the bed, trying to do a lot of stuff with the camera direction.
Inside the frame,
a lot of things inside the frame as far as a blocking standpoint, and X was similar to that. I mean, it was the same effort, but a different desire. But there was a lot of effort to do things like that, and to try to get a lot going on in a frame and revealing things in the frame, like you don't know there's a bird in the scene, but you hear it, and then you see it, and you think, okay, and then later the bird means something, and things like that. And so it was always about trying to, in a way that's almost like the sort of Hitchcock style of telling the story with camera direction, and that was something that was on my mind from a reference standpoint, is just trying to tell the story with the camera as efficiently and clearly as possible, where it would be like, okay, we see the axe and we don't see you, and then you appear, and then the axe is over top of you, and then you guys cross over, and things like that were always something that I was trying to dance with a little bit.
Ty, can you talk a little bit about David Corenswet and what about him made, you know, him perfect for this role? Because I feel like he was just so excellent in this, and I feel like he really embodies the exact archetype of the kind of character that you're trying to portray with him in this film.
Yeah, David's great. He seems a little bit plucked from another time. He was someone I wasn't super familiar with. I had seen an episode or two of The Hollywood Show, and that was probably all I had seen of him. But we got on Zoom. It's not too dissimilar to how you and I met, or the same way, actually. And he just got it. You know, like he also really likes, like, Singing in the Rain is one of his favorite movies. And so, like, from the very beginning of the conversation, I think he understood the movie. And it's the kind of movie that you might not get from the page, or you might not get from me explaining it, because it's a bit out there. And he really got it, and he really understood, even down to the degree that the projectionist is like, may or may not even be real kind of thing. He really understood not only who he was as a person in the movie, but who he was to her in the movie. And that was important because the movie was very cinema focused, and so it was nice to have someone who was going to be a tremendous actor and could do a very truthful performance as this person, but also knew the movie was in, and knew that the movie he was in was Pearl's story, and it mattered how he existed in her story. And that was, for me, really helpful because it was, well, that was the goal, you know, and so it was, I felt ahead as soon as we got him. So he was one of the only people, actually the only person that came down from the States to New Zealand to do the film. And he was, everyone else we cast from New Zealand.
I'm sorry, they just came to tell me that we're out of time, so we have to finish this, and I thank my guest and our guest, and thank you for the film.
Thank you for having us. Grazie.
Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti alla conferenza stampa di Argentina 1985. Vi presento subito i nostri ospiti qui al tavolo, che sono i produttori Federico Posternak, Augustina Liambi Campbell, Axel Kuszewatzki, Victoria Alonso e Cino Darin. Gli interpreti Alexandra Fletchner, Peter Lanzani e Riccardo Darin. E il regista e sceneggiatore Santiago Mitre. Allora, vedo che l'atmosfera è bella calda, questo ci piace moltissimo, ci sono tante domande, vorrei soltanto cominciare io con una domanda introduttiva per il regista ma anche per qualcuno dei produttori, chi vuole rispondere. Credo che la storia di questo processo così importante per l'Argentina, ma direi per il mondo intero, non fosse mai stata raccontata prima, il che è abbastanza bizzarra come cosa. Secondo voi perché? E perché avete pensato che fosse arrivato il momento di raccontarlo?
No, con razón. Bueno, perdón. Buenas noches, decía. No dormía anoche, así que por eso le saludo. No, pienso muy parecido a lo que acaba de decir en la introducción. El juicio del 85 es un hecho fundamental, importantísimo para Argentina, que inaugura la democracia y que a partir de la condena a la violencia como posibilidad, y era un hecho que creíamos que el cine tenía que retratar, y nos alegra haber podido ser, nos alegra y nos enorgullece haber podido ser los primeros en haberla contado y en poder presentarla, bueno, no solo ante el público argentino, sino ante el mundo. No, ¿por qué nos hizo antes? No lo podría decir.
Difícil.
Sí. Proceso, sí. Tal vez hacía falta tiempo como para poder contarlo, no lo sé.
Y recursos.
Qualcuno dei produttori? Someone or producer want to say something?
Sí, yo creo también que toda sociedad tiene un momento para narrarse a sí misma, y la sociedad argentina y el cine argentino estábamos todavía tratando de narrar los horrores de la dictadura y nos llegó el momento de narrar la democracia, así que también creo que fue un momento para hacerlo y empezar a contar no solo el principio, sino todo lo que sigue después.
Creo que todo momento después de que esto pasó podría haber sido un buen momento. Se dio en este momento gracias a que este grupo magnífico de gente ha podido llevarlo a cabo, pero un país sin democracia y sin justicia no es libertad.
Yo me atrevería a sumar algo, y es Argentina 1985 es una película sobre algo que ocurrió en Argentina en 1985, pero es una película sobre la fragilidad de la democracia y cómo no existe democracia sin justicia. Y no hay nada más contemporáneo en el mundo en el que vivimos que la fragilidad de la democracia, la necesidad de compromiso de la ciudadanía y la necesidad de justicia para que todos podamos seguir teniendo libertades individuales.
Allora, ci sono molte domande, cominciamo lì dalla signora, perfetto, e poi...
Si sente?
Sì.
Non possiamo dimenticare quello che abbiamo visto oggi sui giornali, che è appena accaduto, e questo ha proprio a che fare con il momento di fare questo film. L'attentato, il tentativo insomma, che c'è stato di uccidere la vicepresidente è qualcosa che il Presidente ha appena dichiarato essere l'evento più grave dalla democrazia. Questa domanda ve l'aspettavate, ma il film quasi la chiama, insomma.
Sí, no, la verdad que fue fuerte y un gran shock para todos nosotros. Muchos de nosotros estábamos en el avión viniendo hacia aquí cuando sucedió ese atentado. Y nos enteramos cuando aterrizamos de lo que había sucedido. Y la verdad que es un hecho horrible que no pensamos nunca que podía suceder, porque si hay algo que nosotros creíamos que el juicio del 85 había saldado para siempre, es la violencia como posibilidad de resolver conflictos políticos, y es algo que repudiamos enérgicamente y que creíamos que ese nunca más que plantea el fiscal Estracera había sido para siempre, y vemos que todavía la violencia sigue existiendo. Entonces creemos que la película sigue teniendo, digamos, cobra una vitalidad que nosotros no pensábamos. ¿Alguien quiere agregar algo?
Allora, la signora in giallo e poi arriviamo da tutti, non preoccupatevi. No, deve aspettare il microfono.
Kelly Velázquez de la France Press. Ustedes, es una película obviamente muy emocionante, muy bien contada, pero seguramente no aparecen los vuelos de la muerte. ¿Cree que eso, que fueron denuncias hechas sucesivamente, limita un poco la historia de la película?
La investigación que llevaron a cabo los fiscales Estracera, Moreno Campo y todo su equipo se circunscribió a una serie de delitos que eran conocidos en el año 85. Luego, por supuesto, a lo largo de los años siguieron apareciendo más y más crímenes que se fueron investigando y luego afortunadamente lograron ser también condenados, pero nosotros nos circunscribimos a ese juicio.
Prego.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Felicidades por esta película magnífica, con un tono milagroso, que me parece que es muy importante que nos explique por qué decidiste enfocarlo con esta mezcla de humor. Y luego también me gustaría preguntaros por... esta película es como si fuera un chute de vitalidad, de capacidad, implica las nuevas generaciones. ¿Qué es lo que le está diciendo a la Argentina de hoy?
Bueno, es difícil la pregunta, ¿no?
Bueno, también para Darín, que no está hablando mucho hoy.
No, perdón. Hola. Tu mirada es, creo, muy apropiada en ese sentido, porque si bien es cierto, es una historia que refleja lo que para mi gusto, y creo que el nuestro, fue uno de los juicios más importantes de la historia de la República Argentina y que además sirvió como ejemplo para el resto del mundo. Si bien es cierto, está hablando de un hecho del pasado, reciente, tiene connotaciones y resonancia en nuestra actualidad, pero en todas partes del mundo. Pero básicamente está mirando hacia adelante, está mirando a las generaciones nuevas, a los que tienen que tener muy en claro, y es importante que esto se plasme a través de los ejemplos y no de los discursos, la importancia de recuperar la dignidad, de saber que no hay que bajar los brazos, de que hay que mirar para adelante con libertad, pero con justicia y con la verdad. Entonces, es posiblemente una de las, por lo menos para mí, una de las dos miradas más importantes que tiene esta historia, esta película. Una es esa proyección hacia el futuro, hablando de algo que ocurrió en el pasado, y intentando contestarte el porqué del acierto de que en algunos tramos de la historia, a pesar de la dureza, de la oscuridad que necesariamente la película tiene que trazar, a pesar de eso tiene situaciones que son un poco más relajadas, no precisamente cómicas, pero son más relajadas porque es cierto que realmente fue muy engorroso y muy trabajoso armar lo que fue el equipo de la Fiscalía. No nos tenemos que olvidar que en ese momento nadie quería subirse a esta titánica tarea. La gente más encumbrada y prestigiosa rehusaba formar parte, un poco por no creer en la posibilidad de que el juicio se hiciera, y por otro lado, bueno, habrá otras explicaciones. Pero el otro rasgo que a mí me interesa mucho de la película es que está básicamente enfocada en la humanidad. Es una película humana y en eso está muy comprometida la mirada hacia el futuro para los jóvenes.
Sí, puedo agregar en relación al tono ese levemente humorístico que tiene la película por momentos. Es algo que descubrimos durante la investigación. El fiscal Estracera, el real, era una persona con un humor muy particular y que se lo contagiaba un poco a su equipo. Creo que lo hacía como forma de protegerlos frente al horror de lo que estaban descubriendo.
Y de sacralizar. Sí. Los quería alivianar en la tarea.
Sí, y bueno, y la película lo utiliza también, creo que de la misma manera en la que lo utilizó el Estracera durante la investigazione del juicio.
Sì, prima di ridarvi la parola volevo approfittare delle parole invece di Riccardo per chiedere anche a Peter e Alejandra come si sono preparati per il loro ruolo, che tipo di ricerche hanno fatto. Il film ha richiesto naturalmente delle ricerche approfondite e degli incontri con le persone.
Perdón, escucho muy bajito el...
Devi...
Ah, de acá es...
Bueno, empezó así.
No, yo no entendí nada.
¿Qué tipo? Ay, uy. Ok, gracias. Bueno, perdón este silencio, pero las actrices, los actores siempre de algún modo nos preparamos para nuestra tarea, a veces investigando, a veces de modo consciente y a veces de modos no tan visibles. Yo viví el juicio a las juntas, era una muchacha muy joven, no era nonata, no era no nacida, era una muchacha joven de 20 y pocos años y que era bastante consciente de lo que sucedía, sabía lo que estaba pasando, sabía algunas cosas de las que habían sucedido. Por eso creo que el juicio, además de ser un hecho histórico, como ejemplo internacional, fue un gran espejo hacia adentro de una sociedad que algunas cosas no quería ver y el juicio hizo que las viera. Por otro lado, en mi adolescencia viví la dictadura cívico-militar cuando iba a la escuela, por lo tanto siento que hay una preparación, que mi preparación está tatuada en mi vida, en mi cuerpo, en algo que yo viví. Y que uno ni sabe a veces que lleva adentro. Me resultó, por eso para mí me siento tan orgullosa de estar representando esta película, tan feliz, porque siento que es necesaria, porque siento que a veces el pasado ilumina el presente y a veces el presente también ilumina el pasado. Podemos volver a ver algo que sucedió y verlo de otro modo. De hecho, hoy los juicios de lesa humanidad continúan en la Argentina. Digo, en 2022 hay condenas. Quiero decir, este juicio, si bien nosotros estamos viendo un momento histórico, es un momento presente de algún modo. Continúan los juicios a los represores, en fin. Entonces, bueno, esta es la preparación, digamos, en principio invisible, la que uno no sabe qué va a suceder cuando va a actuar. Y luego el trabajo aquí con Santiago, con Ricardo, con todo el equipo. Yo leí el guión y me pareció impecable, me parece una inteligencia suprema. Y cuando un guión es así, bueno, es fácil de actuar. Creo que era muy lindo también mostrar esta intimidad de Julio Estracera, este mundo de familia donde alguien no es un fiscal, sino es la persona con todas sus contradicciones, con todas sus luces y sombras, con todos sus miedos, y esta mujer tan autónoma, ¿no? No una mujer como la esposa de un fiscal, sino una mujer que también lo cuestiona, que lo empuja, que creo que él casi lo hace subir al trampolín, ¿no? Que decir, tírate a la pileta. Y bueno, todas esas cosas, hablo mucho, así que me voy a callar. Ya contesté.
Peter.
Pietro. Yo no viví la dictadura, nací más tarde, pero sí creo entender algo de humanidad y siento que eso es lo que más me llegó cuando leí el guión, poder empatizar con lo sucedido y aprovechar la oportunidad, más allá de que justo es un tema en nuestro país, ¿no? que nos marcó tan a fuego. Obviamente sabía de los hechos y entendía lo que estaba contando, pero creo que en posición a mi personaje, a Luis Moreno Campo, creo que con lo que más empaticé es con eso. Él encontró de alguna manera u otra la oportunidad de poder llevar a cabo este juicio, contar esta historia y yo sentí el mismo compromiso cuando Santi me llamó para interpretar el personaje. Poder contar esta historia es un honor enorme y poder mirarnos a los ojos entre colegas, actores, humanos, haciendo las escenas fue mejor todavía, porque en los ojos ya sucedía, lo hayas vivido o no, todos podemos empatizar y sabemos qué cosas están bien y qué cosas no, y la violencia realmente no va por ese lado. Después, a la hora de componer el personaje, bueno, trabajamos mucho con Santi los textos, tratar de encontrar las musicalidades. Es un personaje muy distinto a lo que venía interpretando últimamente. Ya en el léxico del abogado es bastante complejo en sus palabras y en su manera de hablar, así que me vestía en mi casa de traje, recibía a mi amigo con el que vivo de traje, me hablaba de doctor y creo que de ahí fuimos encontrándolo y me gustaría destacar el honor que fue para mí trabajar con un actor como Ricardo, que para mi generación es una eminencia, por así decir, y más allá de descubrirlo actoralmente, descubro que antes que todo eso es un humano impresionante, así que lo adoro y para mí fue un honor grandísimo poder hacer esto con él y con Santiago, que es un director impresionante. Te felicito, Santi. Te felicito, Ricardo. Gracias.
Yo no tengo mucho para agregar porque ya mis compañeros, colegas describieron todos los trucos que hay en la actuación, cosa que detesto profundamente porque es bueno mantener el enigma.
La magia.
La
Hay que
magia.
revelar los trucos,
Por
¿verdad?
eso todo el mundo quiere actuar hoy en día, porque se dieron cuenta que es fácil. Sí, fue el cortito. Trabajé muy codo a codo con Santiago en un principio, a partir de su idea, y la primera vez que leí la primera versión de guión, quedé encantado con la historia, como me imaginaba que iba a ocurrir. Las distintas y sucesivas versiones se fueron todavía mejorando y puliendo cada vez más. Eso es una plataforma de trabajo inimaginable para los actores, porque como muy bien decía Alejandra recién, cuando uno tiene una historia entre manos tan claramente diseñada, tan inteligentemente dialogada y demás, las cosas son verdaderamente más fáciles. Después, con el tema de la aproximación al personaje, con Santiago tuvimos creo yo, la buena idea de no buscar emularlo ni copiarlo a Estracera. Buscamos un camino propio, siendo prudentes y respetuosos al mismo tiempo con algunas características que consideramos que tenía el personaje y que eran imperdibles. Cuando apareció en la investigación y en el diálogo el tema del sentido del humor de Estracera, que era bastante ácido y áspero y que lo utilizaba como una especie de catarsis dentro de su equipo, eso terminó de definirnos un poco más el perfil del personaje que nosotros estábamos construyendo, no del real. Y eso fue todavía mejor. Y empezamos a darnos cuenta con el correr de los días de que la cosa funcionaba bien de esa forma. Y después no puedo dejar pasar la oportunidad de devolver los elogios de mi compañero Peter. Hicimos una muy buena combinación química entre nosotros. Yo ya lo quería porque es amigo de mi hijo y además había tenido oportunidad de conocerlo anteriormente y había visto muchos trabajos de él y me gustaban, pero en el mano a mano, en el encuentro diario, nos afianzamos muchísimo y creo, a pesar de lo que él pueda pensar, de que parte de la posibilidad de componer esta dupla, cuando uno no quiere, dos no pueden. Así que yo le agradezco a él, porque gracias a este aporte suyo en esta combinación es que me sentí realmente muy cómodo. Y estoy feliz porque el resultado a la vista me demostró que no estábamos equivocados. Estamos a mano.
Buen Peralta, de República Dominicana.
¿Qué tal?
Hola. Hay una frase en la película. Yo pienso que cada país latinoamericano, o la mayoría, ha tenido un tirano, de alguna forma.
Lamentablemente sí.
Y hay una frase en la película que me marcó, porque dice que dejar de utilizar la muerte como herramienta política.
Sí.
¿Qué significa esto para ustedes y por qué en los últimos 15, 20 años Argentina se ha enfocado mucho en contar historias alrededor de todos estos sucesos?
Nosotros atravesamos dictaduras varias, las últimas muy sangrientas y muy, no solo crueles, sino también difíciles de entender, y estamos muy marcados por eso. Durante mucho tiempo no se pudo hablar del tema por razones obvias, y cuando se abrieron las ventanas para poder hacerlo era absolutamente imaginable que todo el mundo iba a querer tener su versión de los acontecimientos. Algunos lo consiguieron, otros no. Hay mucho dolor en esa historia. Es cierto lo que decís con respecto a los países latinoamericanos. Tristemente todos, de una forma o de otra, en mayor o menor medida, han atravesado sociedades aplastadas por tiranías, por dictaduras, por incomprensión, por intolerancia, y todavía se siguen viendo en algunos casos. Y esta es lamentablemente la historia de la humanidad, no solo de Latinoamérica. En algunos casos se han conseguido resultados mucho mejores y nosotros seguimos trabajando en lo mismo. Y creo yo, vamos a seguir trabajando en esto. Y en ese sentido es que es importante que quede por encima de todo destacado lo que es la justicia y la verdad, porque a la larga la verdad siempre aparece, y hay que hacer lo imposible por defender la justicia.
Me parece que el cine es una gran ventana para las sociedades, como para poder revisar su propia historia y a partir de ahí poder reflexionar y mantener vivas bueno, la memoria y ciertas cuestiones que son fundamentales para el crecimiento de la sociedad. Hay una frase que dice Luis Moreno Campo, el real, con quien estuve charlando mucho en el último tiempo, que era la primera batalla ocurre en el campo real y la segunda ocurre en la memoria. Y creo que el cine nos permite eso, ¿no? Como poder mantener vivos determinadas situaciones que son importantes ahora y van a seguir siendo importantes para siempre. Nosotros creemos que esta película habla sobre Argentina, pero no solo habla sobre Argentina, le habla a todo el mundo.
Claro.
Gloria Escola, de España. Felicidades, creo que es una película clásica, magnífica y perfecta. Y en mi caso, ojalá gane el León de Oro. Ricardo Darín, han pasado 37 años desde este proceso, ¿no? Fue en 1985. Me gustaría saber cómo lo vivió Ricardo Darín, o sea, qué recuerdos tiene, dónde estaba, si durante la época de la dictadura en su entorno, imagino que sí, pero algún familiar conocido fue una víctima.
Todos. Es muy difícil escapar a la posibilidad de que, digamos, en el ámbito cercano o indirectamente alguien no haya tenido algún caso de dolor. Sí, todos de alguna forma hemos pasado por eso. Más allá de dónde estuviera uno parado y cuál fuera la edad exacta que tenía en esos momentos. Pero sí, todos los días, no nos olvidemos que cuando se instala en una sociedad el terrorismo de Estado, lo primero que hace la inteligencia de ese terrorismo es intentar anular a los ciudadanos, que no haya comunicación. Lo primero que atacan es la comunicación, el encuentro, el cara a cara, que no se corra la voz. Eso hace que en muchos casos se tarde, que la verdad tarde en pegar la vuelta y en encontrarse con las personas con las que se tiene que encontrar. Más allá de la importancia de lo que puede haber ocurrido con nosotros siendo tan jóvenes, adolescentes y demás, no hay que olvidar que estábamos vedados de información, porque lo primero que hace el terrorismo de Estado es cortar la comunicación, o sea, instalar esa sensación absolutamente aterrorizante de que no hay que comunicarse con nadie. Entonces siempre fue muy difícil saberlo. Por supuesto que había gente comprometida, militante y demás que estaban mucho más al tanto, pero los adolescentes vivíamos en una especie de cierta nebulosa, más allá de que te podía tocar en casos personales una proximidad y entonces ya no había tanta nebulosa, se notaba mucho más claramente qué era lo que estaba ocurriendo. Pero la verdad tardó un tiempo en pegar la vuelta. Con respecto a 1985, al juicio concretamente, yo tenía mucho trabajo en ese momento, era joven, tanto como ahora, y no nos olvidemos que no hubo una televisación como ocurre hoy con respecto a lo que fue el juicio. Sí, los comentarios empezaban a ocurrir, la sociedad estaba muy expectante de que era lo que hubiera, pero sobre todo en lo que fue, si no me equivoco, la parte final, en donde al principio nadie creía que pudiera ocurrir. En la película, en nuestra película, está plasmado de alguna forma. Nadie estaba convencido de que el juicio fuera a ocurrir. En muchos casos algunos pensaban que era una especie de cortina de humo, algunos pensaban que era una utilización política circunstancial y que no iba a llegar a nada. Es decir, había muchas posiciones frente a la novedad, a la noticia. Pero sobre el final de lo que fue el juicio, sí, ya la sociedad estaba mucho más expectante y estábamos todos mucho más ansiosos por saber qué era lo que iba a ocurrir.
Y por último, me gustaría saber cómo se reprime la rabia.
Bueno, eso yo no estoy habilitado o capacitado para analizarlo en términos individuales. Cada uno hace lo que puede con respecto a la rabia, a la ira, a la cólera. Por eso es que es importantísimo revisar cuál es la violencia propia, la interna. qué es lo que nos pasa a nosotros adentro, porque a veces sin darnos cuenta podemos contribuir a esa violencia generalizada. Yo creo que si uno tiene sensibilidad humanista, el primer deber es tratar de ponerse en el lugar del otro, incluso cuando recibimos una agresión, porque la bola de nieve que produce la agresión y la violencia es muy fácil de generar y es muy difícil de detener. No nos olvidemos que el odio probablemente sea el único sentimiento que no prescribe.
No, y yo sí puedo agregar algo a eso, creo que algo que muestra bien la película, porque lo mostró muy bien el juicio, que dar testimonio es una manera excelente de combatir la rabia y tener la valentía que tuvieron todos estos testigos de decir lo que les había pasado y esa búsqueda de justicia desde el relato de lo acontecido sin violencia es muy poderoso, es una herramienta muy poderosa de sanación y de búsqueda de justicia, dar testimonio.
Pero en general el artista crea y parte de nuestra rabia es crear. Para nosotros, de haber estado ahí yo a los 19 años, no es algo que uno se olvida, lo que vivimos, de la manera que lo vivimos y cómo lo vivimos. Entonces, cuando uno empieza a buscar qué es lo que voy a hacer con mi vida y el arte llega a tu puerta, de repente por ahí tardás 36 años en hacerlo, 37, pero llega, porque eso es parte de tu fibra, es parte del ADN nuestro. Lo podemos reprimir, nos podemos olvidar, podemos no querer verlo, pero es quienes somos. La violencia que vivimos no se va nunca. Y de lo que decía usted, señor, de lo que es la muerte, a la muerte no se la puede romantizar. A la muerte no, una cosa es decir la violencia psicológica, que todos vivimos, porque es parte de la represión. Pero la muerte es un hecho. Las 30.000 personas que murieron es un hecho. Los 3 millones de personas que se fueron al exilio es un hecho. Esa es nuestra bandera también, no la azul y blanca solamente. Entonces, para tener este momento importantísimo en la fragilidad de la democracia universal, no ha llegado esta película en mejor momento que nosotros podamos decirles como personas que vivimos la violencia, que vivimos la muerte, que la violencia no lleva a nada, nada. Y como legado a nuestros hijos, demostrarles una parte, un capítulo de nuestra historia que quizás no lo quieran mostrar de esta manera. El arte, en cierta manera, tiene responsabilidad. Nuestra responsabilidad ha sido mostrarles de la mejor manera posible, con algunos cambios acá o allá, pero un momento en nuestra vida de un genocidio y de una violencia salvaje, que es muy diferente a la otra violencia, es el salvajismo de la dictadura militar. La rabia existe.
Sí, perdón. No, quería agregar que eso, después de un plan tan sistemático y salvaje, esas personas que llevaron adelante ese genocidio tuvieron un juicio. Digo, esa es una respuesta también de una sociedad. Digo, esto es también una forma de tener instituciones, digamos, que hacen, digamos, que la justicia logra dar un juicio justo a personas que hicieron lo que hicieron, ¿no? Y que por ahí internamente, como decís, la rabia, el rencor, la venganza, no, es, bueno, se hizo esto y estas personas también merecen un juicio justo. Van como en consonancia con lo che decías vos.
Dobbiamo fermarci qui, mi dispiace molto, so che c'erano altre domande, lo so, l'ultimissima, molto veloce.
No, lo siento. Quería daros la enhorabuena por la película y sobre todo por haber conseguido un juicio, cosa que como española pues a mí me da bastante envidia. Ha mencionado antes la capacidad del cine para contar la memoria, y es verdad que la película ahonda en eso, en la capacidad del relato para cambiar lo que se pensaba de la dictadura en varias ocasiones, ¿no? De convencer a la clase media. Y quería preguntarle por cómo el cine ha ayudado a contar también la memoria de un país, de su país.
Bueno, perdón, gracias. Eso es verdad que es una línea importante en la película porque, como decíamos, en el 85 había mucha gente que sabía mucho y había mucha gente que no quería saber del todo lo que estaba sucediendo, y el juicio logró amplificar y poner en la tapa de los diarios todos los días el nivel de atrocidad de lo que había sucedido en la dictadura, y fue evidente para todos que ese juicio era la forma de fundar un nuevo país, digamos, una nueva forma de concebir la política, digamos, a partir de un respeto por las instituciones y un respeto por la humanidad. Eso se continuó hasta el día de hoy, y creo que es una de las cosas que como argentinos nos tiene que hacer sentir orgullosos. El cine, por supuesto, tiene la posibilidad de poder colaborar con que eso se vea. Nosotros cuando empezamos a escribir el guión nos dábamos cuenta de que no había mucha gente que recordara el juicio del 85. Y el juicio del 85 sucedió un año después de que terminó la dictadura. Y se estaba juzgando a los 9 comandantes de esa dictadura, que fueron los que idearon el plan sistemático. Pero las personas que secuestraron, que torturaron, los rangos medios, estaban libres. Los testigos se sentaban a declarar sabiendo que los tipos que los habían secuestrado todavía estaban libres. O sea que hay algo en el momento en el que sucedió ese juicio que fue milagroso y muy valiente, y que al día de hoy a mí personalmente como argentino me emociona. Así que me alegra muchísimo haber tenido el privilegio de haber podido contar esta película, que hayamos podido contar esta película, porque me parece que es una película que era necesaria, digamos.
Y agradecerle profundamente a la gente de Venecia y al festival de darnos la oportunidad de venir a ser el primer lugar donde venimos a traer nuestro arte. Pero el arte salva, sempre.
Dobbiamo fermarci qui.
Grazie.
Molte grazie a tutti.
smaller room last year.
Yes, they moved it. They made a screening room of the other one. So we have one more theater. Benvenuti.
I got bigger, the room got smaller.
Well, you're getting bigger. You're getting a golden lion. Benvenuti alla conferenza stampa del nostro film fuori concorso Master Gardener, che è diretto da BLOODSHED, che è anche il Leone d'Oro alla carriera di quest'anno. Prima di cominciare vi presento gli ospiti al tavolo a partire dalla destra in fondo. L'attrice Quintessa Swindle. L'attore Joel Edgerton. Lo sceneggiatore, protagonista e regista del film Paul Schrader. E la coprotagonista Sigourney Weaver. Before I open to the public, I'm going to start with a question for Paul. I'm here. Before I open to the public, I'm going to start with a question to you. This is your third time in Venice in the span of very few years, and this is the third film of a trilogy.
My fifth time is it.
Yes, but the trilogy is 3, and they're very recent.
Yeah, the trilogy is, yes.
So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this new chapter of it.
How shall we work this? Do you want?
You don't need.
I don't need these to speak, though.
No.
Years ago, I came across a character who was a sort of product of European literature, an existential hero from Dostoevsky, Camus, Sartre, a man without qualities, and he ended up walking into the movies as a taxi driver. And he was a new character in the movies, and he's been around the movies ever since. And occasionally I revisit him. And when the technology became possible and the budgets became lower, I had more freedom. So I have revisited him now 3 times in a row. And the big difference is that he's older, as am I. And when he was a young man, he would approach an older man like Peter Boyle and say, I have these terrible thoughts in my head. Now he's the older man, and young people approach him. The environmentalist, the kid who wants revenge, the girl from the inner city. But he's still that person he was before. So that is just the process of aging and how this character has evolved, and hopefully I'm done with him.
C'è una domanda là.
Hello everybody, congratulations. What a spectacular film. Paul, congratulations on the Gold Lion, the career achievement. It's past due, I'm sure. I wanted to ask Sigourney and Joel, when you got word that this was a Paul Schrader script and you saw these characters, what did you think about them? Was it easy to settle into them? And is making a Paul Schrader movie really different than any other kind of movie that you do? Thank you.
Do you want me to go first?
No, I can go.
You go first.
Well, I read the script, and it was a revelation. Oh, sorry. How's that? Better? Try to yank it toward me. I got the script a couple of days before I met Paul, and it was so different from any script I'd ever read. It was kind of a vertical script, so it looked very sort of simple on top, but there was so much underneath it and so much passion in this particular story. And I always admired Paul's work, never dreamed of working with him because I'm not a lonely man in a room, but I am a lusty woman in a house, so he explained that it was a love triangle, and the characters were all so, I think, very fleshed out, especially Norma. It's one of the best roles I've ever had, and I could never get to the end of her, and I loved Paul for writing 2 great women's parts. Not that he hasn't done it before, but this was really a commitment, I thought.
The generation that I come from, you know, as I was going to drama school, you know, guys like me, we were looking at performances of guys like De Niro and that came out of that era of 70s filmmaking, and it didn't really occur to us at the time when we're looking at those performances are real, are as indelible and as interesting as they are because of the writing behind them. And obviously Paul's behind a few of those movies that helped shape my interest in becoming an actor. At that time, I was thinking about going to drama school. So there's that, which I have him sort of quietly to thank for in retrospect. A few years ago, I was living in New York and I saw the trailer come up for First Reformed, and it was one of those films that comes along where I'm like, I have to see that as soon as possible. And I did on the first day it was released at the Angelica, and it met and exceeded my expectations. And then a few years after that, I get a call that Paul wants me to be part of potentially the end of the trilogy that started with First Reformed, and I would have said yes despite what the script was. But the script itself is really interesting, and I think it creates this sort of familiar theme that I see in Paul's work of tranquility colliding with chaos, and with the questions of scrubbing one's past and particularly a conundrum of a relationship that forms in this film that is like, all right, you can either hide from your past and keep it buried, or you have to sort of find a way to navigate together with another person, acknowledging things that have happened before and questions of redemption. And I just was fascinated by it. But like I said, Paul could have just told me where to turn up on what day, and I would have said, all right, what are we doing? What are we going to do?
I like to follow up with Quintessa because you know, Paul's characters have a long history. Your characters in the film have a long history. You bring the new element, you know, the last generation. And as Paul was saying, the introduction of younger characters and contemporary issues in his films have brought a tenderness to the films that is very important and profound. And so, how did you negotiate your character within this big past, you know, both behind the camera and in front, you know, and in terms of the characters?
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. It was, I think something that like me and Joel were actually talking about today in some like other conversations was like how well each character is like laid out. You know, the blueprint is like truly there, like everything from the environment to the exchanges of the characters and everything. So it was just like, I don't know, like just diving into it and just giving into it like fully, and just like adding elements that like a young person today, especially like a young Black woman, experiences, and like inputting that into, you know, this world as well. So there was, yeah, a journey. That makes sense, y'all.
Question
there. Peter Paul Huth from Germany. I have a question to Mr. Schrader. I was wondering, towards the end, there's a great tenderness at the ending, and not a violent, and in a way violent, but not as violent as in other endings of other films of yours. Is it that you have become more mellow, or do you want the characters to get off better?
Well, I'm moving away from it, and also I was part of a generation. I was part of a generation that came in, you know, riding the coattails of violence, and you know, that time has come and gone, and so the notion of how and if we can participate in our own redemption, evolves. And the young man's notion of the Christian notion of redemption through blood. You know, I'm washed in the blood. You know, I suffer like Christ suffers, and therefore I redeem. And if I can't do that, I'll shoot somebody. Then that evolves. And so in First Reformed, he doesn't quite blow up anybody, but he probably dies. But he finds redemption. And then in the card counter, it happens off screen. And this time, finally, it happens on screen. And the man who was thrown out of the garden by the evil goddess, the same one who invited the snake in the first place, he can live with her there. And then that song, which was written by a friend of mine, for me is it, which is, I never want to leave this world without saying I love you. And so that's what it's about. That's what happened.
Here. No, il microphone.
Hello. First of all, thanks a lot for the movie. It's really spectacular psychologically and visually. My question is, I think, primarily to Mr. Schrader, but to the cast as well. This metaphor of a garden, which starts from their opening titles and goes through the whole film, how do you perceive it as you first read it? It's for the actors. And Mr. Schrader, did this story started with this metaphor of the garden and then came all the rest, or it developed in the process of writing?
Well, I mean, of course, the garden is the oldest metaphor in art, and you know, it all begins in the garden. And I was thinking, you know, it's an interesting character, particularly for someone who's in hiding, and my characters are always in hiding. And I said, well, what kind of man would hide out in the garden, you know? And so originally I thought that he was a refugee from the witness protection program, that he was a hitman, a mob guy, which is kind of a cliche. And then the politics of the world, and I thought, you know, to take a Proud Boy and put him in the garden and see whether he can be forgiven. Now, I don't know whether he can be forgiven. I don't know whether this story is even possible, that you can be a white nationalist and be forgiven by a black girl in a garden. That's maybe a fantasy, but it is a very interesting fantasy, and that's what we do in art. We create these hypotheticals that are worth ruminating about. And this was a hypothetical that came out of the garden.
The question was also for the cast. Does anyone want to add something to?
I don't know about everybody else, but you know, listening to the discussion about plants and their evolution and their decay, I find there's something reminds me of the confidence in the writing of this film, that I can, as a viewer, and I hope everyone else can as well, sort of see the path that Paul is cutting, but also find your own way through this story. And, you know, I find myself projecting my own feelings about the potential for violence and the potential for things to flourish and to be grown over. But one of the things I really loved in it was this idea that this thing that you look at that can be so beautiful needs to be torn apart in order to keep building, and that things need to move backwards in order to move forwards. And I kind of enjoyed that thing, but I feel like it's something that I personally can dive into, even as somebody participating in the film, and find my own feelings about and reactions and responses to the world that I know in this metaphor in a way that it's personal for me.
I remember
I remember when I was first reading the script, and then after that, every time I read the script, there was a line that Norval writes, "Gardening is a belief in the future." And I thought that just illuminated the script for me, because there's so much control and detail and sort of intimacy between the flowers and Norval and everyone who touches them. They're living things, and yet they need, as Norval says, that you need to destroy to, what is it you say?
I'm paraphrasing. I was paraphrasing Paul's better version of it, but the idea that things need to be destroyed in order to be regrown.
Yeah. So I thought that was a wonderful beginning to this story, where, life seems contained and controllable there. And you do expect something to get in the way, Maya. But but you also, when he says gardening is a belief in the future, I thought I felt that it was going to be about love in the end.
I think we have a question.
Hi, Messo Mazzetto, Nocturnal Cinema. I have a question for Paul Schrader. So this evening we received the Golden Lion. I was wondering which of your movies represents you more since the movie you have made until now?
Directors like and dislike their children for different reasons. Probably my favorite is Mishima, just because it's the damnedest thing. I still can't believe I ever made that film. Most personal to me, First Reformed, Affliction, The best stylistically, Comfort of Strangers. Cat people just, it's a vision, so I've been lucky, and I made some zeros, as we all do, but more and more the films seem to have a shelf life. And that's a very tricky thing in art. How do you give a film or any work of art shelf life? How do you get somebody to come back to it 20 years later? And I had this conversation with Bruce Springsteen once, and he had a very calculated, how you go into a song and blur certain lyrics so that you can't understand them for 2 or 3 listenings to build shelf life. And it's the same thing with a film. So how to create shelf life. And of course, you don't know till 20 years, 30 years later whether in fact you were successful at creating shelf life.
You have a question right there, Diane?
Hi, this is Marco Riga from Catalonia Radio. This is a question also for Paul Schrader. And also regarding about the Golden Lion, for your career, if you see at your career, you have said just now that you are happy, but do you consider yourself as a director, a filmmaker, a writer, a creator? Thank you.
Well, I'm a fruition of a number of things, which is beginning as a film scholar, then a screenwriter, then a director, but also a kind of entrepreneur, because how else do these odd little films get made except some Sammy Glick like me hustling his ass around with a baking bowl? So that's worth a lion in and of itself. And so the lion is for all those things.
Definitely is. We had a question here, Ellen. Yeah, it's just the mic is gone.
Helen Barlow from the Australian. Hi, Joel. Hello. Now, this is just a towering performance, but it's so subtle. And we kind of knew, given Paul's oeuvre, that something was going to happen. But even when it did happen, you still didn't explode. How difficult was it to create that? Because it's a masterful performance, and actually the physicality is incredible. You look so buff. And the tattoos, was it difficult? Those two things, the physicality.
Thanks for the question. And, you know, it's quite an interesting challenge for me. You know, as actors, oftentimes we bring a bag of tricks to work, and certain films require, or we think they require, a certain amount of characterization or extending yourself far away from who you are and all this stuff. I believe as an actor, the safest place you can be, hopefully, is you go to work for a director that you respect and that you trust. And the rest should be relatively easy, and you listen and you pay attention and you ask what you think is required of you and you try and do it. Paul and I had those conversations, and the short version of it felt like there was a brief to not bring a bag of tricks, to bring a certain stillness and allow the chaos and the movement and the noise to be happening around a central character. And I felt, to be honest, good at times and very much out of my depth at times, but started to really settle in. And I'm glad for that experience, because I think every job stands to teach you something about what you're capable of and what your comfort zones are. And you know, I was able to just go, all right, Paul, here's me, do with me what you want.
Here's what drew me to Joel. Both Ethan and Oscar knew I was writing this, and they both said, well, we'd love to do it, but I said, you know, I thought to myself, this is kind of like a Bob Mitchum kind of guy. This is like a 50s guy. This is a big slab of beef. This is a guy who you don't want to run into in a bar. Who's like that guy? And then I thought, well, Joel Edgerton, he's a really good actor. And I'd seen that film Warrior, where he's buff as hell. I said, I don't want to run into this guy in a bar. And so that's how it all started.
You didn't want to run into me 15 years ago, but it's a bit easier to run into me now, I think. That's not even really, it's a little bit about the film, and, obviously the tattoos are not real, thank God. Otherwise I wouldn't be at the festival. I'd be in some clinic right now getting them lasered off. The idea, COVID changed my life a lot. I became a father. I started doing yoga all the time. I started getting healthy, and I'm looking down the barrel of getting older, and I want to be able to move and be fluid. And the last time I was at Venice, I was here to present a film which my partner and I lovingly refer to as Fat Joel, because I put on 40 pounds for the king. And I didn't feel it was very healthy for me. So it wasn't so much about the concern of how I would look in the film, but for me, the interest was more about the psychological space of also like allowing us to sort of trust a man. And for me, given Paul's directive, as I said, about how to sort of occupy the center of a film, is to not give any indicators or judge the past through the presence of the main body of the film, and actually create quite a gentle soul, and then allow that to be part of the confusion of whether that person deserves to have the right to scrub the experiences of their past.
Hello, this is Petra Erdmann from the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation. Thank you for the wonderful film. Congratulations, Mr. Schrader, to the Golden Lion. I wonder, making so many movies over the years, starting with Taxi Driver and writing scripts and directing, what did film music mean to you? So I would say in the 60s, so like composers like Bernard Herrmann, they were so, cinematic in a way, or for that time. So now you are collaborating with pop stars. What would you say, how did the tune of film change?
I've always liked new composers. I like people. I started with Jack Nietzsche, went to Giorgio Moroder, went to Phil Glass, Scott Johnson, virtually David Grohl. Now this one is Devante Hines. I've always liked musicians who haven't done many movies before because they're solving new problems. Whereas the professionals, they've solved this problem dozens of times in their life. You know, you say the old house or the creaky stairs, whatever it is, they have solved that problem. But when you get a new composer, he's thinking, oh, how can I solve this problem? So I have been, virtually every film is a new composer.
Una domanda là.
Dinali per Cusano Media Group, avevo una domanda per Quintessa. Hai già lavorato in un film indipendente diretto da Abid Khan, Granada Nights. Com'è passare da un film indipendente a un film diretto da un grande maestro come Paul Schrader? E per il maestro gli volevo chiedere, dato che ha scritto tantissimi capolavori che non ha diretto, se tornasse indietro c'è uno di questi che vorrebbe dirigere da regista oggi dopo tanti anni? Grazie.
Quintessa, did you get the translation? Okay, let me just. So you already made a movie with an independent director, Bill Gunn, and how is it to go from a smaller production with a relatively, lesser known director to to working with Paul Schrader?
No, I go, okay, great.
Okay.
No, it's incredible. I think at the end of the day, in my head, I guess, every director is kind of equal. They all just bring different things to the table. So I don't really see a hierarchy or anything. But working with Paul has been an absolute dream. I feel like as I grow more and more as an actor, I guess I figure out how to trust my co-stars and my director more, and I think Paul entrusted me with such, I think, an important job with what this film represents and what this character represents. So I took it very seriously. So it meant the world to me, and just being able to, I don't know, tell this young girl's story as honest as possible.
I don't know if you know, but Quintessa has a mega budget film coming out in a month, right? The Black Adam or The Rock. They spent more money on craft service in an afternoon than we did on this whole film. So she knows big budget films.
Come on, Paul. It was an honor.
And Paul, the question for you was from the same journalist. The question for you was, since you have written so many masterpieces over the span of your career, was there any film that you did not direct, that just wrote, that you would have liked to have directed?
There are a couple I'm glad I didn't direct. Thank God I didn't direct Taxi Driver. I learned. I was arrogant enough to think I could have directed it, and that would have been a career killer. But I learned how to do it by watching over the little man's shoulder. And it wasn't so much that I thought my scripts were getting fucked up. Although I thought I could make some better, and in the case of Taxi Driver, I could make some worse. What I felt was I was half of a person, an artist. I said, if you want to be a writer, be a real writer. Have people read your words. If you want to be a filmmaker, be a real filmmaker. Have people see your films. What is this thing called a screenwriter? And so that's what moved me on from screenwriting to directing.
I think we have one there, and I think we're running. Yeah, we have running out of time.
Mr. Schrader, congratulations on the Golden Lion, of course. Can you talk a little bit more about your collaboration with Dev Hynes on the score, because his work is quite unique and very almost new wave and very of this time, and I think it's one you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, well, she's referring to Devante Hynes, who is a wunderkind. Whether it's classical or jazz or rap or Blood Orange, Devante can seem to, do almost anything. And but it was not the greatest collaboration in the world because he's very recessive. And I'm used to people beating me up and beating them back up. And, you have a big argument with Devante, then the next day you hear from his agent, he wasn't that happy with what you said yesterday. I said, why doesn't he tell me? So he is a very, very gentle soul and a genius. And I was very privileged to be around him and to see his solutions.
I'm very sorry, but this is all we have time for today. And thank you to our guests for being, and thank you for the film.